in particular a 6-year-old boy named Dennis Martin. Describe that case and the strange circumstances around it.
So if there's one case, probably in both books, I know better than any, it's the Dennis Martin case. And once you read about him and how he disappeared, it'll strike a chord in any parent out there. Dennis was with his dad, his grandpa, and his brother over a Father's Day weekend, and they lived in Knoxville, Tennessee. And June 14th, 69, they decided to go up to an area called Spence Field on the top of the Rockies along the Appalachian Trail. And they hike in a short distance to this field, and it looks like a field, surrounded by trees and things, but there's a field right here. And the Martin boys are out running around, and the grandparents and the grandpa and the dad are just sitting there on the field. And in these stories, every once in a while, you're going to see that I write about a very strange coincidence that happens. And as they're sitting on this field, a family walks up, just pretty weird to begin with because he had to hike into this area. A family walks up and they sit down, and they have kids too. And they say, "Oh, hi there. My name is so-and-so Martin." Mr. Martin looks at him and goes, "Our name is the Martins too." They said, "Well, can our kids sit down and play together?" And he says, "Absolutely." So they sit down and make small talk, and in the meantime, the kids are running around the field. After a little bit, the kids decide that they're going to play hide and seek. Well, Dennis is one of the smaller kids, and Mr. Martin is a very, very smart man. And I've had the pleasure to meet him and speak with him. And he is aware of what's going on around him at all times. And he watched his son during this hide and seek game hide behind a bush 50, 60 feet away from him. And after 30, 40, 50 seconds, everybody comes out, hide and seek game is over, his son doesn't come out. He gets up and he walks over to the bush, and his son's not there. And he runs 2 miles down the Appalachian Trail as fast as he can, and he doesn't see anything. And he comes back, and his dad already knows what's going on. People are looking for Dennis. Red flags are going up. He sends his dad down the trail to get Park Service assistance. And within an hour or 2 hours, there's 100 guys up there, and they're looking. Make a long story short, within a couple days, there's several thousand people covering that park. And what evolves from this is one of the most unusual stories you will ever hear. And part of the fault in what's happened here, I lay directly on the media in Knoxville, and it's still ongoing. And that is that they covered the story from what the Park Service or whoever was pulling the punches here wanted them to, but they didn't tell the whole story. And that is that when Dennis disappeared, the Park Service employees and the rangers, they weren't carrying guns at that time. They hadn't been authorized to. Yet the second day after Dennis disappears, unknowing to anybody, it's like the invasion forces arrived, and 100 Green Berets fly into the park in helicopters and establish a base there, away from the Park Service people and away from other searchers. And they set up a communications post just for them. And they search by themselves. Dwight McCarter was the head tracker for the Park Service then and recently retired, and I interviewed him as well. And Dwight said, "Yeah, Dave, I don't know why they didn't communicate with us. I don't know why they didn't search with us, and I don't know why they were carrying guns. But they went out and searched while we were searching, and about 100 of them. And as the people are searching, during those first hours that Dennis was gone, first few hours, a family was down below them at about 2,000, 2,500 feet in an area called Cades Cove. And they'd asked rangers where they could go to see animal life. Rangers told them an area called Rowan's Creek. And they walk up into this area, an entire family, and the boy says, "Dad, look, there's a bear up there running amongst the trees." And the dad looks up and says, "Son, that's not a bear. That almost looks like a man." And they watch this thing dart behind trees as though it doesn't want to be seen. Simultaneously, they hear the loudest scream they've ever heard in their life. And this family's name, their last name was called the Key family. Keys don't know that a child's been missing. They just are walking through the park. So they get back in their car and they go home because they don't know anything's happened. Next day, they read about the Martin disappearance in the paper, and they read that the FBI is on scene monitoring this case. Well, the Keys feel that what they saw was extremely important. And they call the FBI and they say, hey, we'll meet you at the park and we'll tell you and show you what we saw.
All right, 6-year-old Dennis Martin disappears June 1969 in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Green Berets are called in. Another family, the Key family, sees something pretty weird flitting around in the trees. Pick up the story from there, Dave.
So the Keys call the FBI, and the FBI says, no, don't come to the park. We'll come to you. Now, first of all, as an investigator, I want to see what they saw. I want to understand if it's plausible what they saw could be involved with Dennis or not. So the statement was odd to begin with. So the FBI agent and a Park Service investigator go out and meet the family, and they tell them the story. And the FBI agent appears to be calling the shots on everything. And he comes back and he tells the Park Service, it's nothing, don't worry about it. It's not possible, not plausible. And Dwight McCarter hears the story, and he tells me, Dave, it was plausible, it was likely, it was the best lead we had. And I said, really? He says, well, it was within the guidelines of plausibility in time and distance, and the FBI agent says it wasn't. So a couple days go by, and nobody hears anything about this, including Mr. Martin, who had been given instructions that he would be updated on anything close to a hint of evidence he'd be told about. Well, he was never told. And what happened was that a newspaper guy got onto the story because the Key family saw that it was given no press. Nobody followed up with him. It's like it got swept under the carpet. The Keys call the press, and the press goes out and meets with him, and they tell the press the story. So the press comes back to the FBI and the Park Service and says, well, is this true? Why weren't we made aware of it? Blah, blah, blah. And the FBI agent and the Park Service give the press an admonishment. We don't know what that was, but I'll tell you what the eventuality of it is. And they're told it doesn't fit, but you can run the story, go ahead, but it's not anything to worry about. Well, Mr. Martin hears from McCarter, no, this is within reason. So they walk the distance, and they find out that not only is that within plausibility, it's well within the guidelines of what could be real. And it's the best lead they had. They didn't have anything. So Mr. Martin's getting a little upset because he doesn't think that the Park Service is making the call on this, and he started to feel right away that his son got kidnapped. And he didn't mind telling people that. He goes, I know my son. I know how fast he can move. I know his mentality. This isn't him. There's no way he could have gotten away like as fast as he did without help, blah, blah, blah. So they keep going with the search, and there's 3,000 people there. It goes on for 3 weeks, and it rains every day for 2 weeks. From the time Dennis disappeared, 2 weeks later, it rained nonstop. So seems pretty unusual. We make a Freedom of Information Act request. We get the documents. We interview McCarter. And from reading the statements in the paper about the Key family and hearing from McCarter, the last person I wanted to talk to was Mr. Martin. But everybody told me he doesn't talk to anybody. So every once in a while as a policeman, if you want to talk to somebody, sometimes it's best just to cold call him. Just go knock on his door. Don't give him time to think about it. Be polite, be respectful, and that's what myself and another researcher did. We went, found Mr. Martin, knocked on his door. He came to the door. I was very humble. I said, Mr. Martin, I've been researching your case for several years regarding your son. I probably know more about it than everyone but you. And if you please give me 5 minutes of your time and just answer a couple of questions, I'd be eternally grateful. And you could see tears start to come up in this guy's eyes. And he looked in the house and he said, I made a promise to my wife I wouldn't talk about this anymore because it's ruined our lives. And I live with the hell of knowing that my son isn't here with me. And I just can't talk about it. And I said, hey, I came all the way from California. Can you just answer a few questions for me, please? And he looked inside at his wife. He closed the door and he stepped onto the porch and he gave us about 20 minutes. The man was very polite, and he is still hurt very hard by this. So I went through a series of questions, and I said, one thing I asked him is that when this son went behind the bush playing hide and seek, did you hear, smell, feel anything odd? He said, nothing. And I said, how about your other son that was there? He said he heard, felt, smelled nothing. He said it was like everything was normal. And I said, is there any chance that your son could have gotten away from you that quick? He said, zero chance. There's no way. And if you look at pictures of Mr. Martin when his son disappeared and today, he's still in phenomenal shape. I believe what he's saying. And so we started to talk about the Key family observation, and his eyes lit up. He says, Dave, you know about this? I said, yeah, I've researched it a lot. And it seems like that was probably your best lead. He said, yes. I said, well, why wasn't it followed up? He said, Dave, I thought the Park Service was in charge of their park. But he said, somebody else is making the calls here. It wasn't the Park Service. They were just following somebody else's orders, and I don't think it was coming from the Park Service. He says, the FBI agent said it wasn't possible to make that distance, yet McCarter and I hiked it in easily that time. And one of the last questions I asked him was, I said, in an investigation, I always ask people, what should I know that wasn't publicly available but would help me understand what happened? He goes, oh, wow. He goes, people have never asked me that. He says, the first thing is the Key family observation. He says, you obviously know what was printed in the paper. I said, yeah. He says, you want to know what wasn't printed in the paper is that the Key family saw something running behind the trees. Well, that something was carrying something on its shoulder, but the press wouldn't print it.
Oh,
My eyes lit up. My eyes lit up. I said, you're kidding. He says, no. And I said, well, did they ever address that to you? No, they just swept it under the rug. They didn't want to deal with it. And he said, and then, the FBI agent that you've been talking to me about. I said, yeah. And I said, well, from the feeling is, he said he was just monitoring this case. And Mr. Martin said, no, he was really actively involved, and it was possible from all the discussions I had with people, including McCarter, it seemed like he was the one making the calls for some odd, very odd reason. And Mr. Martin said, well, that FBI agent, he was the same one on other children's disappearances up here. And I even named the disappearances to Mr. Martin. I said, on this. He said, yes. And he says, do you know whatever happened to that agent? I said, no. He says, he committed suicide. And for the people that are listening, that may not mean a lot to them. But once you understand the way the FBI manages their people, is that everything you learn in an investigation you cannot release to anybody else without approval from a supervisor. And everything has to be held confidentially. And when an agent is monitoring a case, they're writing case notes and reports and sending it to Virginia. And those report files are then reviewed by a profiler and placed into other files that have significant other meaning to what you may be investigating. And if there's an agent in the field that's investigating something similar, he's given information just like that. So he can work it with a more educated perspective. The implication being is that this agent was obviously told something, and this is what Mr. Martin was getting at without it being said. He knew something that obviously hurt him.